Okay, welcome back, guys. We're looking at example 1. Determine whether or not each function is periodic. Then, if it is periodic, determine the period, the amplitude, and the domain and range. Okay, well, there's a bit going on there. Let's think about this for a minute. First one, is it periodic? Well, let's see. Can I find a cycle, a pattern that if I was to cut it out would repeat, it would propagate in both directions of the horizontal axis? So if I was to cut this out here, now see that arrow? That's implying that it's going to keep going. See this arrow? It's going to imply it's going to keep going. Now I don't know for sure that it's coming all the way back down and popping back up, but in terms of this course, in terms of this section, we're going to assume that this is a periodic function. We're going to assume that this is going to continue, and it's going to continue up to where it was going, and then it's going to continue, get the slope right, it's going to continue back down. Now it would have been nice if they showed me a little bit more, but they didn't. But we're going to assume for this purpose that this is a periodic function. And again, we're going to assume that this is continuing down and get the slope right, continuing back up. So for this one, we're definitely going to say we believe that it is periodic. Meaning that if we were to cut the pattern, now you choose where you want the pattern to start from. I'm going to start it from something that I can count. I think I'll start from here, go up to here, and back down to there. And notice I can cut that and place it right at the tip to tip here, and we're going to have a repeat of the pattern. I could cut it and I could put it over there. Now, that's one place I could have cut this pattern. You notice if I think a little bit, I could have cut it here, and it might have been a little bit easier. Here, down to here, back up to there. And that might be a little bit easier to work with, because you notice if I cut it at those two ends and then place it here, it matches up beautifully. And I place it here, it matches up beautifully. Looking at the period, that certainly makes life easier, because now I'm going from a starting point of x equals 0 to a ending point of x equals 4. So that means that my period is pretty easy to calculate. My period in this case would be 4 units. And you need to put the units in there. Just call it units. The amplitude. Now remember, the amplitude is the maximum and the minimum divided by 2. So the way we do that is we do max minus min divided by 2. And what that does is it allows us to take my maximum number, which is 3, come all the way down to my minimum number, which is -1. So the negative here allows that to be added. So it was 3 units up and it's 1 unit down. And that negative is what lets that be added. And then that's divided by 2. So that's going to be 3 plus 1 over 2, which is 4 over 2, which is 2 units. So we have the period, we have the amplitude. Domain and range. Well, we're going to assume that it's a periodic function, and the arrows on the end mean that it keeps going. So your domain is certainly going to be x is an element of the real numbers. It's going to keep going and going and going. That's what the arrows mean. That's our assumption. Our range, however, we're going to go from our maximum value, 3, and our minimum value, -1. Now remember how we do that. We do a brace bracket, and we're going to say, I forget how I taught it to you, but I think the easiest thing to do is to say the lowest value. So x is going to be greater than or equal to, not x, sorry, y, the function. We haven't given it a name, so we could call it y. Earlier in this lesson, I said that sometimes we call it f of x. So y is going to be greater than or equal to -1, but it's going to be less than or equal to 3, and y is an element of the real numbers. And I believe that's the way that we learned it earlier this course. There you go. We've answered it all. Let's look at this one. Is it periodic or not? I don't think so. No matter where I cut this puppy and try to play, it's not going to match up. It's not periodic. So, not periodic. Well, if it's not periodic, then there's no domain. If it's not periodic, then there's no period. If it's not periodic, then there's no amplitude. However, it still has a domain and range. Let's not fool ourselves. So the domain, again, we've got these arrows continuing. So this curve is going to continue, which means all of the x values are still part of it. So x is an element of the real numbers. And its range, this range, it seems to be going up. This range seems to be coming down. Everything in between seems to be covered as well. So your range would be y is an element of the real numbers. Okay, next one. There's a weird looking thing, eh? All right, so is there a pattern that could be cut and then put along so that it keeps repeating itself? Well, it's certainly not just that half, is it? Because we have to be able to go down below. So that certainly isn't the pattern. But what if I was to cut it here? Yeah, there's other places you could have cut it. Absolutely. But what if I cut it there? If I pick that up and place it here, would it continue? Yeah, we kind of think it does, right? The arrow's there. And if we pick it up and place it here, yeah, we kind of do. Now, again, they haven't really given us enough information here. I'd like to see a full pattern on either end, but we're going to assume at this point that this is periodic. We're going to give it an amplitude. We're going to give it a period. Well, we're going to calculate the period. It already has a period. So it's going to go from this point here, which is negative 2.5, all the way up to positive 0.5. So that will be a distance of 3 units, right? So negative 2.5 on this side, positive 0.5 on this side. So the total distance, remember I'm not adding them, it doesn't become negative 2. The total distance here becomes 3 units. And it's positive, right, because it's going to be a distance. And the amplitude, you take your max, minus your min, divided by 2. So my maximum is here. So that looks to be about 1.5, and my minimum is about there. So that's about negative 1.5. So the question is, this distance divided by 2. So, well, that distance is going to be 1.5 subtract negative 1.5 over 2, which is 3 over 2, which is 1.5. And that makes sense. You could have just looked at it and given me the answer. So 1.5 units. It's domain and range. Let's put it over here. Domain, the arrows indicate that it keeps going, and we're making the assumption that it's periodic. So x is an element of the real numbers. And the range, we're going to go up. We're going to go down. So I would start with the lowest one, negative 1.5. Y must be greater than or equal to negative 1.5. Y must be less than or equal to 1.5. And y is an element of the real numbers. All right, that's example 1. I'm going to stop here and we'll go on to example 2. Oh, wait. Haha. See you soon.